Let's begin with the title, which sometimes gets overlooked as being one of the more important aspects of a poster, because remember that the title is the first thing that your potential visitor is going to see. You want that title to be engaging. You don't want it to necessarily trivialize the subject, and certainly certain subjects you don't want to poke fun at, but if you can find some way to bring in your reader in a creative way, in an engaging way, that can be a real boon for a title. Yet, you want that title to concisely describe the work that you did. You want it to relate the project that was done and the findings. And so in one fell swoop, you're trying to do a lot of things with a title. Once a person is drawn in to your title, probably the first place they'll go from there is your introduction. And it is in the introduction where you're going to blow up that background information that you had previously utilized for lead-in to your hypothesis. You're going to give more details and nuances that were maybe not stated in the earlier submissions. So it is a brief summary, but it is a summary that is much more extensive than that you saw in the abstract. If you find yourself putting a lot of in-text citations, this in-text citation, came from this book, and this in-text citation from this journal article, and this one from this newspaper article, then you're doing something very right. So please make sure that your introduction is knitting together many disparate sources and bringing together the perspectives of the time when you set out to make your hypothesis. You want a good introduction to be like a funnel. You want the top of the funnel to establish the most broad and applicable interest. You want a reader to say, wow, this pertains to me. And you want to then funnel down to the specific hypothesis that you made. You want your reader, by the time she or he reads your hypothesis, to say, dang, that's exactly what I would have said, because you've done such a good job of leading them to that point. This is the goal of an introduction. Hypotheses, done, right? Don't need to worry about the next section, so we can just scan right on by all of this. It's already been done. Your research methods, part D here, is also partially done because you've spent some time relating it on your abstract. However, in the research methods in the poster, you're going to want to relate much more detail about the methods that you used and how you accessed them. So make sure that this just gives your reader the full lowdown. Sometimes you will find that it is not possible to meet the reference requirement that I am asking you to meet. Let me just reiterate, that reference requirement is that I would like for you to have one public perspective, that is newspaper, magazine article, and one journal literature article, okay, for each month of the semester. This should be pretty doable. So what that means is probably in total you'd have something like 3 journal articles and 3 public perspective articles that pertain to your topic. For nearly every topic, this is going to be a very easy requirement to meet. However, occasionally somebody chooses a project for which meeting this requirement is difficult. Let me give you an example. One semester I had a group that decided that they wanted to research the correlation between the legend of the vampire and the rabies virus. Clearly, not a lot of recent literature on that subject. It was more of an archival study. So I okayed that project with glee and said that you would need in your research methods section to explain why you could not get recent references for this subject. So you may find yourself writing a section in your research method section that tells why you couldn't meet that requirement. Next section is the most developed and most important of your actual poster. It is the part for which you have done the least background work. In your abstract, you have highlighted the preeminent findings that pertain to your hypothesis. However, in the summary and discussion, you're basically presenting all of the things that pertain to your hypothesis in a very well-organized manner and a very explicit manner. So you're going to go through blow by blow all of the research findings, all of the journals and their findings that that allow you to address your hypothesis. So you might find that it's helpful to make a timeline, particularly for the predictive hypotheses. Maybe you show over time what events have happened that have allowed you to address your prediction. That might be a really effective visual way to do that. And in fact, any time in a poster when you can use visual knit with text rather than just text, you're doing something right. So making sure that remember that people will only spend on average about at most 10 minutes at your poster. So you want to make it as visual and as standalone as possible, something that someone can visit in a short period of time and still come away with the take-home messages. So this is the lowdown of the summary and discussion, but make sure that, as is true in any good write-up for any science, you always want to make sure that you come back and that you readdress your hypothesis. You say whether it was supported, whether it was rejected, whether it was modified, and you clearly explain that. You also want to close the circle. That's what I like to call it. That is to say, a good poster will be like a circle where in the introduction you establish this broad interest, and then at the very end you come back and you say why your specific research addresses this broad interest and where it allows you to go from here. So that closing of the circle is a very important part of the summary and discussion. I want to talk now for just a little while about the references, and we will use a particular citation style. We will be using the Journal of Bacteriology format, and you'll notice that there is a link to the instructions to authors for that particular journal's format. And so you can go ahead and follow that link, and you can actually download a PDF of the instructions to authors, and you can scan down once you've downloaded that to the references section. However, that being said, I have also done a lot of work to tell you how you might utilize this referencing format. Notice that the next thing in the assignment description is an example. So it shows you that you'll write the author's names, that you'll follow that by the month and year. And in fact, I'm asking you to insert the month here, even though Journal of Bacteriology doesn't ask for that. I would like to see that. And then the title of the journal article, as well as the title of the journal, followed by the volume and the pages. So that's an example of how you might cite a journal article. If you want to cite something strange, maybe you want to cite a lecture, or there's something that's not as normative that you want to cite, go to my website, which is linked here, and that gives some ideas for how to cite some other unusual things. However, when in doubt, just include more rather than less information. And remember that the point of citation is not a hoop through which I'm having you jump. It's not, oh man, I better do this or I'm going to get caught for plagiarism. You know, those things are true. You know, we have to do it, but that's not the reason that we do it. The reason that we do it is that saying who said is a part of conversation. It's not only a part of scholarly conversation, but it's a part of average everyday conversation. I mean, think about it. You're out at the bar, you're having a drink, you know, and you're talking with your friend, and your friend says, so I hear so-and-so hooked up with so-and-so. And the first thing you say is, really? Who said that? Ah, citation, right? You're craving citation, and we want that in all of the work that we do. If we say something on the lines of, for example, biofilms are considered a natural state for most microbial microbes and allow protection from environmental stresses. Really? Who said? Sources 1 through 3. That is what in-text citation does. It tells us who said, and it is incredibly important. Okay, great. Now, you'll notice here that I've given a full passage from a publication utilizing the Journal of Bacteriology citation format. Notice that in-text citations are in parentheses. We use the number scheme, and then those numbers are seen below where we see the author and journal article format that we reviewed above. So this gives you both the in-text citation format of Journal of Bacteriology and how to do the references list. So you should have all the examples that you need in order to do an excellent job of sourcing on your posters. Now, A few last words on the poster itself. Remember I mentioned that inclusion of visuals, particularly visuals that communicate, is very, very desirable because you want to be able to communicate with someone visiting for a short period of time. Also, pictures can sometimes communicate and engage. Please make sure that you have citations for every figure that you utilize. If the figure is copyrighted, if you go into an online source and it says this figure is copyrighted, you need to email those with the copyright and say, can I use this for a class presentation? If it's not copyrighted, then you still need to say where you got it. Now make sure that you also indicate why those figures are pertinent to your poster. That is, don't just have a floating picture somewhere and people are going, well, what is that for? Make sure that in your text you say the characteristic rash of shingles seen in figure 1, right? So that your reader knows what that figure pertains to. So we remember the referencing citation requirement, one journal article and one public perspective from each of the first 3 months of the semester, or at least each of 3 months of the semester. Remember, if it's not possible, to put that back in your methods section. The last thing that I want to do today is to talk to you about the methods that you might use to seek your resources, and there are a lot of them. First off, I want to talk about the library's website. The libraries have a phenomenal website, and one of my very favorite features on this website is the databases under articles. And if you just type in www.lib.uwio.edu, you'll access the library website. You can click right on these databases, and one of my very favorites to use is the Web of Knowledge, or the Web of Science. So if you just scan on down, you're going to come into contact with the Web of Knowledge. You can click on that, and then you can go ahead and enter the search that interests you. Perhaps you are just at this point totes soups jazzed about the human microbiome. Understandable, especially if you've been working your way through the book that Rob Knight wrote. So human microbiome, you're going to get a lot of hits for that, and tons of them are going to be extremely recent. So for example, this one right here, starch and starch hydrolysates are favorable carbon sources for bifidobacteria, which, remember Rob Knight talking in the book about how that's one of the types of bacteria that we find in our gut. And so this is looking a little bit more in depth at that. You can scan down a little bit and see many, many recent publications, and in some cases these are literally not published in hard copy yet. Some of them are published only as an EPUB, so they're very, very recent. Building the Microbiome in Health and Disease, Niche Construction and Social Conflict in Bacteria. Obesity and the link between obesity and microbiota. So many important conversations to be had about human microbiome. So that's a very broad topic. You could definitely start there. Perhaps you are also interested in things like arboviruses. Those are certainly on the rise. We've seen things like Lyme disease being contracted more frequently. Maybe that's something that's interesting you. Maybe you just simply kind of want to get taps on what are some things going on. And so maybe you want to look at the CDC's website. So let's actually look up the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, and that should bring up a large resource that will allow you to perhaps potentially track statistics on certain diseases. Of course, we're not going to be surprised to see that Ebola is going to be featured on this site. But there's also some other things they're talking about. Vaccination, that's an interesting topic, certainly one that could be delved into for a poster presentation. The even more favorite to me than the Centers for Disease Control is the World Health Organization, or just the WHO. The WHO takes a more global perspective on health, and this website will have a slightly different focus than the Centers for Disease Control website will. And in many cases, if you're more interested in a slightly more epidemiological approach and a more holistic approach, the World Health Organization is a little better for that. And this is really cool. Africa advances towards a polio-free continent, and the polio vaccine has been debated, and there's been a lot of urban myths about the polio vaccine and the drops that are used. in some countries, which in and of itself is an interesting debate. And so the cases of polio have actually been on the rise because of a lack of vaccination. So this is an interesting article that's actually looking at that. So these are great resources, absolutely phenomenal ways for you to access literature and or statistics, background on your topics. But please, as you delve into your research, always let the assignment description be your guide, and always come back to this vodcast, and always think about the DA approach to learning and how together you can definitely delve into those topics that will eventually save the world. And quite literally, some of these are such important topics that you may find that the poster presentation that you do in general microbiology informs the entire rest of your career. Your graduate work may focus on something similar. You may become so passionate about the topic that you chose that it may turn out to be the thing that you try to follow through with for the rest of your life. Maybe it's such a big problem that you know that it can affect, we've looked at things like impacts of climate change on vector spread, and these are problems that deserve a lifetime's worth of dedication. And please remember that your peers, I want you to begin to envision them very much like the way that we think of the DA Club and the Room of Requirement, and don't downplay the contribution that a group member that has a Neville-type personality might be making eventually to your group. Try to integrate them holistically, bring in everybody, and give them the respect that they're due. My favorite expression that I made up some years ago is treat the person sitting next to you as if he or she has accomplished amazing things. You will never be wrong, and you will certainly never be sorry. So take that perspective into your group work. Don't forget these little micro due dates, and make sure that you are staying on top of this project. It's not a project that is an end of the semester project. It's an all semester, and in fact, it's done by December the 7th. So have a great time with the poster presentation, and seriously, rock my world.